So today I want to introduce, it might be an introduction for some of y'all, it might be a review, the pillars of mindfulness. And these are key features of mindfulness developed by Jon Kabat-Zinn, who kind of secularized mindfulness meditation, brought it over from the East and into the US. And he focuses a lot on introducing mindfulness in medical settings. So that's been his primary focus for a lot of his career, and helping with pain management and bringing mindfulness into when we're struggling with disease and things like that. So his work tends to be much more secularized and sort of medical, and the terminology is a little more in that vein. But he brought this to the West, seeing how beneficial it could be if it was just kind of tweaked in a way that could be presentable to our society. And one of his books is out there, and it goes into more detail about these pillars. And they are non-judging, patience, beginner's mind, trust, non-striving, acceptance, and letting go. And these can be really helpful when you are either beginning a mindfulness meditation practice, or when you're just kind of, maybe you feel like your practice isn't going anywhere. Like sometimes when we do a mindfulness practice, or when we do insight meditation practice for a long time, we can start to feel like it becomes very routine, and maybe we don't feel like we're as engaged with it even if we're sitting. So it can be a nice sort of refresher to go back to and say, oh, okay, let me look at these pillars again and see if I can, what is really resonating with me, maybe what I feel like I need to go deeper on, or understand a little bit more how this is showing up in my life, um, how I can deepen these aspects of mindfulness in my everyday life off the cushion even. So they can be really helpful. They aren't necessarily goals, and they aren't necessarily things we have to already possess for them to be impactful in our practice and in our lives. Often these are things that are cultivated naturally through our practice. Also, he actually calls them, rather than the pillars of mindfulness, which is kind of what society has turned the term into, but he actually calls them attitudinal intentions. It's kind of a mouthful. So I can see why they started creating, well, let's call them pillars. Attitudinal intentions, because they are a way of approaching our practice, the way we would like to go into the practice on the cushion, knowing that we're going to get impatient and restless on the cushion, right? We are going to have thoughts that sort of come up, and we get attached to them, and we start going off, they hook us and we fall into the stories. We know these things about us. And the more we practice, the more we know it. So these can be really nice reminders that, okay, I'm going to sit down. And I've noticed in everyday life that I've really been judging myself a lot. I've been very harsh with myself. I've been reacting in kind of negative ways internally, negative self-talk. So we can come to the practice and say, okay, my intention for this practice is I'm going to notice when I'm judging, and I'm going to disengage the judgment. That isn't to say that we're not going to judge. There's a difference, right? We are going to recognize when it comes up, recognize it like, okay, I see you, judgment. Allow it to be there. That means it's there. We're not engaging it. We're not trying to figure it out and analyze it. We're just saying, okay, it's there. And then we're going to bring ourselves back into our body. And we're going to do that as many times as we have to do it, in as many times as it comes up in the practice. And this might be a practice that we have to do for months, every single time we sit down, or every single time we see judgment come up in our everyday lives, right? And that can become frustrating, because we can feel like, oh God, not this again. I just don't want to deal with this anymore. Patience. there's our opportunity to practice patience, right? So we're given opportunities to practice those things which we maybe need to focus on, to really investigate. And that is the next piece of it. We recognize it, we allow it, and then we begin to investigate it. I like to use the word intuit because investigation triggers a sort of analytical kind of, meaning. But what we're really doing is beginning to understand it deeply within our bodies, because all of this is about staying embodied, remaining rooted in the present moment through the vehicle of our bodies. And it's in the repetitive practice, the repetitive recognizing, the repetitive allowing, that we begin to sense an intuition about what is underneath the judgment, the impatience, the striving, and all of those things, right? And we begin to sense it. And the more that we begin to sense it and feel it in our bodies and allow it to be there so we can sit with it, we can get to know it, right? It's developing a relationship with it, because often these are things we don't want to have anything to do with these things, right? They get in the way of our productive lives, but they need attention. So that the more we get to know it, we begin to understand it within our bodies intuitively. And then we can begin to give it what it needs. Because it's something that it's demanding our attention for a reason. It needs something from us. And that's the nurturing piece. And this is a process. It's called RAIN. It's pretty well known in mindfulness meditation circles. Tara Brach is one that's most well known for doing it, but I believe it started before her even. But it's really a process. If you are a person that needs a process to begin to understand something, typically type A personalities, these can really benefit from these types of things. It's a really helpful process to learn the practice, and really, really beneficial, because the whole point is that we will fail in meditation. I don't use those kind of words very often when it comes to meditation. We will fail in meditation. That means we won't do it. That's the only way you fail in meditation, is that you just give up on it and you don't do it. If we believe that the point of meditation is to sit down and not think and not feel, we will fail, because we will feel that we're failing, and so we'll give up on it. So with mindfulness meditation, we are developing the relationship with what comes up within us when we're sitting, right? Why is that important? Well, because this is how we really get to know ourselves better. Most of our lives we're conditioned to not really know ourselves, or not really be ourselves, to be a certain way, to fill a certain role, to accomplish a certain thing. It's all external. We're encouraged constantly to be external. These practices turn us inward. And then we begin to really know ourselves and understand what we need. And it doesn't stop there, right? That's just the beginning. And this is more significant piece of the practice in our society, because the structure of society doesn't allow for it, than it is sort of in other, like, Eastern societies. But the real benefit, other than getting to know ourselves and developing these relationships with ourselves, is how we show up in the world and how we influence the world. And the more we practice, the more we see how it changes, how we interact, what we react to, what we stop reacting to, and pause and allow ourselves to make choices about how we're going to respond rather than react. But all of these things, they're very basic, but we will notice them as we begin to practice. Like, okay, I want to nurture this piece. I've noticed that I need this sort of nurturing, right? Whatever it may be. But I'm sensing a lack of trust. And that can be very subtle when it's turned on ourselves. Sometimes we have to go really deep before we realize distrust is underneath a lot of it, right? Because when we start turning toward ourselves, when we start recognizing and developing this relationship, we start noticing some resistance. This resistance that we're feeling when we're trying to nurture ourselves is is based in sort of a lack of trust. Because if we've abandoned ourselves repeatedly in the past, if we haven't allowed ourselves to be authentic in the past, that will come up. Just like if you're in a relationship with someone else and they've treated you a certain way for so many years, and then they're like, oh, but I'm going to change. And you're like, I don't know. That's sort of like what's happening inside. Your inner self is like, I don't know. So, you know, trust can be something like that sense of distrust can really come up. So we can still be intentional about saying, I want to grow in trust with myself. And what does that mean I need to do? And beginner's mind is really interesting, one of the pillars, because it encourages us to approach things with like a childlike mind. All of us were children at one point, and probably most of us at some point within being, in our childhood, whatever our childhoods were like, we were naturally curious. We naturally asked questions. We didn't have any sense of who we were supposed to be yet. At some point that happens, whatever age, is different for everybody. But we were open. We saw people it's like we were able to see inside people, at a certain age of our life. We saw right through the exterior and right into the person. We could see, go out into the world, even in the city, and see the one tree that had the beautiful birds in it. And we could focus on, oh my God, how amazing is this? Instead of seeing the dog shit sitting at the bottom of the tree. And it's an intentional way of approaching the practice and life is to say, I'm going to sit here in this meditation practice and I'm going to be open to whatever comes up. And that's an approach of beginner's mind, right? Being open, being curious. And when judgment comes up, because it will at some point, most likely, bringing in curiosity disarms it. And this is a really good way of getting past the judgment. And when I say past, I don't mean eliminating the judgment. I'm saying we see the judgment. It's like going through a door, right? The judgment door. We see the door, but we're going through it to the curiosity. So we can move past the judgment, even though we're aware that it's there. And then just a little bit about acceptance. It kind of goes hand in hand with trust, because often we don't accept ourselves in a very deep way. And I can tell you, none of us came out of the womb judging ourselves and not accepting ourselves. We didn't have any of that. That we learned. We learned judgment. We learned impatience. We learned distrust. All of these things were taught to us. And what that means is that we can unlearn them. Knowing that, and of course we know that intellectually, but once we start to know it in our bodies intuitively, changes everything. Because suddenly, if we find that we're in positions a lot of times where we're feeling a little bit hopeless, or we're feeling like we don't have any power to change anything in the world, or just our lives are not on the path we want them to be, it can be a very hopeless place. But then we start to remember, hold a second, I was taught all these things. I didn't believe any of this stuff when I was 3 or 4 years old. So sometimes bringing that image of yourself as a young child can be really helpful in your meditations, whatever that is. Sometimes when we're trying to build trust with ourselves, it can be helpful to imagine ourselves at a young age, maybe before, at a time in our lives before we were taught all of these things, taught to not trust ourselves, taught to be something we're not. And invite our younger self, visualize it. I mean, I literally, when I was doing inner child work for a long time, would visualize myself at this particular age, this little pigtails, and she would come to me. It sounds kind of crazy, but it really does work. She would come to me, but she wouldn't come to me. She would sit across from me. And gradually over time, as I worked with this and inviting her and saying to her, you're safe, it's okay, you're safe, she would start sitting in my lap. And then it would get to the point where she would come without me asking. And so it can be a really helpful healing process if we have some healing there that we need to do, or in a way that we can build trust for ourselves. So again, these pillars or attitudinal intentions are not goals. They're ways of intending to be. When we sit down on the meditation cushion and say, okay, I'm going to be open and I'm going to sit with it. And then what we notice is that in doing that, setting that intention and being that way intentionally on the cushion, those things start to strengthen, right? We don't have to sit down and say, okay, I'm going to trust myself today, right? Because the more we sit there and listen to ourselves and recognize what's happening and allow it to be there without pushing it away, without judging it, the trust just naturally increases. And then that brings us to non-striving, which is that's what kind of happens naturally. But we have to be aware of striving, especially if we're ambitious people who are goal-oriented. Striving has to be something that we really keep ourselves aware of in our meditations. And it can feel hard in the body. It can feel, like when you're working on something and you're like really focused, concentration is really hard. You notice you're in your head rather than in your body. Those are some sort of signals that you're maybe striving too much. So this is a really valuable sort of roadmap that is not only a roadmap, but also a result, right? So it can be really beautiful to see how those two things go hand in hand. And I would encourage you to use it as a reference in your practice or even just in your everyday life to kind of see if you work with these qualities, what kind of becomes the result. So let's go ahead and have a sit. And you can come into a comfortable position on your cushion. And you are welcome to have your eyes closed or a soft gaze a couple feet in front of you, whatever is best for you, whatever you need in this moment. We'll begin by taking in 3 deep inhales and exhales at your own pace. And then just allow your breath to come into its natural rhythm without controlling, without forcing the breath to be in any particular pattern or way. Allowing your awareness to begin to sink into your body. Just knowing how just noticing how it feels to be in this body in this particular moment. Bringing your awareness to the top of your head. Just noticing how the top of your head feels in this moment. What characteristics do you notice? You might notice temperature, pressure, just some sense of presence of the hair. Whatever it is that's there, just notice it. Gradually begin to scan your awareness over your forehead and eyes. Sometimes the muscles around the eyes, it can be very subtle, but we can be holding some tension there. Just notice if you're holding any tension around your eyes. And if so, just let it relax. Continuing down over the jaw and the neck, again, an area we often carry tension. The shoulders, and just noticing if you're feeling any tension there. And if you're not sure, sometimes contracting those muscles on the inhale and letting them go on the exhale can make you more aware of how those areas are feeling. Continuing down over your chest and upper back, through your torso, the lower back, the muscles in the stomach, and down into the hip joints. Noticing the sensation of the seat below you, the cushion below you. And continuing into your legs, your knees, your lower legs and ankles. And coming finally to rest your awareness in the sensation of your feet on the floor. Noticing how that connection, the sensations of the feet on the floor feel. Just noticing it, holding it lightly without forcing too much concentration. Noticing if you feel pressure. If you have a blanket, maybe you feel the texture of the blanket. Perhaps there's a temperature. Just noticing these characteristics. And gradually, while maintaining a gentle awareness of the feet, begin to expand the awareness to include the ankles, to include the legs, the knees, expanding it further to include the tops of the legs and the hips. Noticing all of the sensations in the lower body. Noticing what it feels like to notice all of the sensations. And then gradually expanding further to include the feelings in your stomach and lower back, your chest, torso, including the feeling of your hands and your arms, your shoulders and the neck, the jaw, and the eyes, and the head. And sometimes when we are increasing our window of awareness, our sort of bubble of awareness, you can feel a tightening in the muscles around the eyes as we're striving a bit. Just notice if you sense that, and if so, let those muscles soften a bit. Just notice how it feels to sit in this bubble of awareness You're able to notice all kinds of sensations within the body. You might even be bouncing around between sensations, and that's okay. Just settling gently into a knowing of the experience of the body. Noticing the quality of the breath without changing the rhythm, letting it be natural. Just noticing if it's shallow or deep, where the movement is, mostly if it's in your chest or your belly or your shoulders, just noticing. Observing what it's like to be in this body in this moment. Begin to slowly gather the awareness and rest it in one particular sensation in the body. Something that is more prominent than the others. The particular location isn't important. Just allow the awareness to rest in one place. Could be the rise and fall of the chest as you breathe. Could be the feeling of the hands on your body, the floor beneath you, temperature of the room on your skin. Just allowing this particular sensation to be the anchor in which we will rest the awareness. We may notice from time to time that thoughts, emotions, sounds, any number of things may take us away from the anchor. When that happens, it's okay. Just notice that you've left. Perhaps attach a neutral label to it, something like thinking, planning, sound, and gently, without judgment, bring the awareness back to the anchor in the body. As we come into the final moments of this meditation, I invite you, if it feels right for you, to place your hand on your chest over your heart, sensing the support of your body, sensing the warmth shared between your hand and your body, and offering yourself gratitude. Gratitude for the way in which your body is always serving you, even when you are not so kind to it. The ways in which it is always there, enabling you to do the things that you love to do in your life. We'll close out this meditation by this poem by Nikita Gill called Your Soft Heart. You are still the child who gently places fallen baby birds back in their nests. You are still the soft soul that gets your heart broken over cruel words and awful acts when you watch the news. You are still the gentle heart who once tried to heal a flower by attempting to stick its petals back on when ignorant feet trampled it. This is why you are important. This is why you will always be needed. Kindness is the greatest endangered thing. And here you are, existing, your heart so full with it. You're welcome to open your eyes and come back into the room.